The year was 480 BC. The world trembled beneath the footsteps of a god-king. Across the burning deserts of Persia and the frozen peaks of Bactria, the banners of King Xerxes rose like black flames against the horizon. His empire stretched farther than any before it, from the sands of Egypt to the valleys of India, a living machine of conquest powered by gold, blood, and divine will. The Persians called him the King of Kings, the chosen of Ahura Mazda. To his enemies, he was the shadow that devoured the sun. From the marble throne of Persepolis, Xerxes gazed westward, to the fractured, defiant land known as Hellas, Greece, a patchwork of city-states squabbling among themselves, arrogant in their freedom, blind to the storm gathering beyond the Aegean. To Xerxes they were not nations but insects, buzzing, disobedient, destined to be crushed beneath the heel of empire. His father, Darius the Great, had tried to crush them once before. 10 years earlier, his legions had marched into Greece to punish Athens and Eretria for daring to aid the Ionian rebels. But on the plain of Marathon, Greek hoplites, farmers turned soldiers, had torn the pride of Persia to pieces. The defeat was an open wound in the empire's soul. Before Darius could avenge it, death took him. And his son Xerxes inherited not only his throne but his fury. Now that fury burned across every horizon. Xerxes would not send an army, he was the army. He would march at its head, a god in flesh, leading a force so vast that, as the chroniclers would say, it drank rivers dry and devoured entire nations in a single march. From every corner of his dominion came soldiers, archers from Assyria, cavalry from Bactria, charioteers from India, spearmen from Babylon, and sailors from Egypt. Each carried a piece of the empire's will. Together, they were the storm. In the heat of summer, the earth itself seemed to bow beneath their weight. Messengers galloped across Asia, carrying one message: Greece would burn. Xerxes stood upon the palace terrace, his golden cloak glimmering in the firelight of 1,000 torches. The night wind carried the scent of incense and blood. Below him, priests sang hymns to the god of truth and order. The king raised his hand to the west, toward the defiant little land that had humiliated Persia, and whispered, "My father could not reach you, but I will." The war for Greece had begun. While Persia stood as a single, towering empire, Greece was a mosaic of chaos, a land of fierce independence and eternal rivalry. Each city was its own universe, bound not by unity but by pride. There was no emperor, no throne, no single voice, only 1,000 banners fluttering in the mountain winds. And yet, beneath the marble and sunlight, the seeds of war had always been sown among Greeks themselves. In the east stood Athens, city of philosophy, art, and reason. Its people worshipped the mind as much as the sword. From the shining marble of the Acropolis, one could see the Aegean glittering with the sails of Athenian ships, the lifeblood of their democracy. Here, words were weapons, and the tongue could strike sharper than steel. But far to the south, in the iron valleys of Sparta, reason was a luxury. Here, boys were torn from their mothers at 7 years old and forged in blood and brutality. Theirs was a life of endurance, pain, and silence. They spoke little, feared nothing, and believed death in battle was the highest form of honor. Their city had no walls. Their warriors were the walls. For centuries, these two worlds despised one another. Athens, the cradle of freedom, mocked Sparta as savage. Sparta, proud and disciplined, saw Athens as weak, corrupted by talk and comfort. Between them stretched a rivalry so old it seemed older than the gods themselves. And yet, when the shadow of Persia began to crawl across the sea, even hatred began to tremble. In 481 BC, the impossible happened. Messengers were sent to every corner of Greece, to Thebes, Corinth, Phocis, Elis, summoning their leaders to gather in Corinth, the crossroads of the Peloponnesian world. There, beneath torches and tension, men who had once been enemies sat across the same table. The air reeked of wine, sweat, and distrust. Athens and Sparta, two forces like fire and stone, faced each other in silence. Neither bowed. Neither smiled. Yet when the moment came, they clasped forearms. The alliance was born. It was not love that united them. It was survival. The plan was simple, desperate, and brilliant. They would use the land itself as a weapon. Greece's mountains, its narrow passes, and stormy seas would serve as fortresses where numbers meant nothing. Athens would rule the waters. Sparta would hold the ground, and somewhere, far beyond the horizon, the storm of Persia was already rising. The gods themselves seemed to watch in silence, for the fate of Greece was about to be decided not by kings, but by courage. The drums of Persia thundered like the heartbeat of the world. Across the deserts, through the mountain passes, down to the silver edge of the sea, the armies of Xerxes the Frorn, son of Darius, marched toward destiny. He did not send an army. He summoned a civilization. From Egypt came bronze-skinned archers with eyes painted in black coal. From Babylon came soldiers in shining scale armor, their shields carved with lions. From the plains of Bactria rode cavalrymen wrapped in gold, their horses adorned with bells that rang like war hymns. From India rolled war chariots with blades on their wheels, their axles glinting beneath the burning sun. The dust they raised blotted out the horizon. The ground trembled. It was said that their numbers were so great they drank rivers dry, and above them all, upon a golden chariot, rode Xerxes, draped in black and gold, the living image of a god. To his soldiers, he was the chosen of Ahura Mazda, a divine ruler whose command was law and whose anger was legend. But to his enemies he was something darker, an endless storm of iron and fire. Yet even the storm faced obstacles. Between Asia and Europe lay the Hellespont, a narrow strait separating two worlds, the land he ruled and the land he was about to conquer. For most men, it would have been a warning from the gods. For Xerxes, it was a challenge. He ordered his engineers to chain the sea itself. Hundreds of ships were bound side by side, connected by cables of flax and papyrus, covered with planks and earth, two colossal bridges stretching across the waves. But nature itself rebelled. A violent storm rose from the deep and shattered his creation. The King of Kings erupted in fury. According to legend, Xerxes ordered his men to whip the sea, 300 lashes upon the waves. Iron chains were thrown into the water, and priests shouted curses at the storm. The sea, he declared, was a slave that had disobeyed its master, and whether by luck, skill, or divine madness, the bridges stood rebuilt. Then, like a living river of bronze and blood, the Persian army flowed westward. Across the Hellespont they marched, men, horses, elephants, and war chariots, while the king watched from a marble platform, his eyes burning with triumph. Behind him, Asia knelt. Before him, Greece waited. The age of negotiation had ended. Now came the age of fire. The air in Sparta was heavy with ritual and silence. It was the time of the Carnea, the sacred festival when war itself was forbidden, when even kings bowed to the will of the gods. But far beyond the Crimson Hills, a storm unlike any other was moving toward Greece. Persia's banners darkened the horizon, and with every passing day, the shadow grew longer. Inside the Spartan council hall, King Leonidas listened as priests recited the laws that bound his hands. Yet as they spoke, his eyes burned with quiet defiance. He understood what the law did not, that delay was death. If Sparta waited for the festival to end, the Persian tide would flood through Greece unopposed. The gods demanded obedience, but the land demanded action, so the king made his choice. A choice that would echo through eternity. He would march north, not with an army, but with 300 of his best. Not the youngest, nor the strongest, but the most seasoned, veterans, each the father of a living son, chosen so that Sparta's bloodline would survive even if they did not. They understood the meaning of this mission. It was not to win, but to stand, to hold the line long enough for Greece to awaken. Word spread through the valley like wildfire. Mothers stood in doorways silent but unbroken, as their husbands and sons strapped on armor. Fathers clasped their children's hands for the last time. The clang of bronze echoed through the streets like funeral bells. At dawn, the 300 formed ranks before the temple of Ares. Red cloaks shimmered beneath the rising sun. Their shields gleamed with the lambda, the mark of Sparta. Leonidas walked among them, his gaze calm, his voice steady. "Eat well, men," he said softly. "For tonight we dine in Hades." Then the march began through mountain valleys and olive fields they moved, a river of red and bronze winding northward toward the hot gates. Villagers stepped aside in reverence and fear. Some wept, others whispered prayers. The legend was already forming. The Spartans were going to stand where the world would break. Beside them marched 7,000 allies from Thespeae, Phocis, and other free cities, men who followed not out of duty, but out of faith. And though each step brought them closer to death, their formation never wavered. Their march was both a journey and a farewell, a final act of devotion to a land that had taught them to never kneel. By the time they reached the cliffs above Thermopylae, the sun burned blood red. The gods watched in silence, and Greece held its breath. The mountains of central Greece rose like jagged teeth above the sea, and between them lay the narrow pass of Thermopylae. The hot gates, steam hissed from sulfur springs, filling the air with the smell of earth and death. It was here, on this strip of land barely wide enough for a dozen men to stand shoulder to shoulder, that King Leonidas chose to make his stand. He ordered his men to rebuild the old Phocian wall, a relic from a forgotten war. Stones were stacked, wood bound with iron nails, until the pass itself became a fortress. Behind those walls, 300 Spartans and their allies prepared to face the storm. This place would be their anvil, and the Persian Empire would break upon it. Dawn came quietly. The sea shimmered pale gold, and mist rolled through the valley like ghosts of forgotten kings. The Spartans stood in silence, shields overlapping, spears angled forward. The only sound was the creak of bronze and the steady breathing of men who already knew they were dead. Then came the drums. Faint at first, like thunder crawling from the east, then louder, faster, relentless. Through the fog they appeared. The Persian vanguard emerged in glittering ranks, banners of gold, armor catching the light like liquid fire. They marched as one, a living tide of steel and fury. Xerxes' generals shouted commands, certain that the Greeks would scatter before the first charge. But they did not understand what waited in the mist. When the two forces met, the sound was like the breaking of mountains. Bronze clashed against bronze, shields slammed like thunder. Persian swords shattered on Spartan shields. Spears pierced through armor and flesh. The pass turned into a funnel of death. Bodies fell and piled upon bodies until the narrow ground became slick with blood. Wave after wave crashed against the Phalanx, Medes, Scythians, Assyrians, all devoured by the rhythm of Greek discipline. The Spartans moved as one, a living machine forged by centuries of war. When one man fell, another stepped into his place. Their arms ached, their lungs burned, but their line never broke. Finally, Xerxes unleashed his immortals, the elite of Persia, 10,000 strong, faces hidden behind silver masks. They advanced in perfect silence, certain of victory. But when they met the Spartan wall of shields, even they faltered. The Greeks rotated their ranks with mechanical precision, driving their spears forward in unending rhythm. Every thrust found its mark. The immortals bled like any other men. By dusk the battlefield was silent except for the cries of the dying and the hiss of the sea. The pass was carpeted with Persian dead, and still the Spartans stood, unbroken, unmoved, and waiting for dawn. The sun rose once more over Thermopylae, cruel, merciless, and red as blood. The mountains cast long shadows across the pass, and the air was already thick with the stench of death. From his golden throne atop a distant hill, Xerxes gazed upon the battlefield. His face, once carved in calm divinity, now twisted with fury. The unthinkable had happened. His immortals, his flawless, deathless guard, had been broken. Their bodies littered the narrow pass below like shattered idols, so the god-king gave a new command. This time, it would not be his elites, but the vast tide of empire itself, Assyrians, Scythians, Egyptians, Medes, and men from every corner of the known world. The drums began again, deep and thunderous, shaking the very cliffs. Down the pass they came, roaring, shrieking, armored in gold and fire. They believed their numbers alone would crush the wall of men before them. But the Spartans did not move. Shield to shield, spear to spear, they stood as if carved from the same stone as the mountains. Their faces were calm, too calm. Between the waves of attacks, when the field fell momentarily silent, some knelt in the dust to comb their hair and polish their armor. It was not vanity. It was mockery, a ritual of contempt. To the Persians watching, they looked like gods preparing for a feast of death. Then the storm began again. Arrows filled the sky, blackening the sun. The air screamed with the hiss of iron. Spears shattered, shields split, and the earth ran slick with blood. But still the Phalanx held. Every man knew his place. Every shield overlapped the next. When one Spartan fell, another stepped forward, silent and relentless. By noon, the heat became unbearable. The air shimmered like molten glass. Flies gathered on the dead, and the cries of the wounded rose like ghosts. Still, the Persians came, thousands more, driving themselves into the narrow corridor, dying faster than they could strike. From his throne Xerxes stood 3 times, shouting orders in blind rage. Each time, the waves crashed and broke upon the same wall, the same disciplined, unyielding line of bronze and blood. When the sun finally sank beyond the cliffs, the pass was choked with corpses. The sea beyond glowed crimson, reflecting the fires of Persian camp torches. And still, the Greeks held their ground. They ate in silence, resting among the dead, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The night air trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. Tomorrow, they knew, the end would come. Night fell heavy over Thermopylae. The fires of both camps flickered against the cliffs, and the sea whispered faintly beyond the rocks. The Spartans slept little. They knew the dawn would bring blood again, but none among them imagined that death was already creeping through the mountains above. Somewhere in the dark, betrayal was born. A local named Ephialtes, twisted by greed and resentment, approached the Persian camp. His torchlight flickered like a serpent's tongue as he knelt before Xerxes. The god king's eyes gleamed gold beneath the moon as the traitor revealed a secret path, a narrow goat trail winding through the mountains, one that led behind the Greek lines. It was the key to everything. Xerxes' smile was cold, thin, and triumphant. Under the pale light of the moon, he sent his immortals, 10,000 strong, led by General Hydarnes, up the hidden trail. Their armor shimmered silver, their masks blank and merciless. Behind them, Ephialtes walked proudly, imagining the gold and glory awaiting him, unaware that his name would be cursed for millennia. The march through the mountains was silent except for the whisper of leather and steel. Greek sentries from Phocis spotted movement among the cliffs, but by the time their alarm reached the Spartan camp, the trap had already closed. At dawn, a lone scout stumbled into Leonidas' lines, face pale, breath broken. "They are behind us," he gasped. The words fell like a hammer blow. Leonidas said nothing at first. His eyes lifted toward the mountains where smoke and dust now rose behind them. The enemy was closing in from both sides. He gathered his commanders, the allies, the Phocians, the Thespians. There were 2 paths before him: retreat and let all of Greece burn, or stand and die buying time for her salvation. His choice was swift and final. He dismissed most of the allies, ordering them to fall back and warn the cities to prepare their defense. But when the time came, 300 Spartans refused to leave. Beside them stood 700 Thespians, who volunteered to die at their side, and 400 Thebans, compelled by fate more than choice. Together they numbered barely 1,500 against the Sea of Persia. No man begged for mercy. No one wept. They simply raised their shields, tightened the crimson cloaks across their shoulders, and prepared to meet immortality. In the distance, the sound of horns echoed through the dawn mist. The mountains began to move, not by nature, but by armies. The last day had begun. Morning broke through the mist like a blade of fire. On the hill above Thermopylae, the last of Greece stood surrounded. 1,500 men, Spartans, Thespians, and Thebans, had become a single heartbeat. A final defiance against an empire that blotted out the horizon. They formed a circle of shields. Shoulder to shoulder, the last fortress of flesh and bronze. The Persians came from both sides, from the front, where the pass ran red with corpses, and from the rear, where the traitor's path had delivered Xerxes' immortals. The sound was unbearable. Bronze striking bronze, the snap of spears, the screams of men crushed beneath the tide. King Leonidas stood at the center, calm amid the chaos, his armor scarred, his cloak torn and blackened with blood. His voice rose once more above the roar, not with fear but command. "Hold your ground." When spears splintered, the Spartans drew their xiphos. short, cruel blades made for close killing. When those broke, they fought with fists, helmets, and teeth. The Thespians fought beside them, refusing to yield even as the ground turned to mud and blood beneath their feet. Xerxes watched from the distance, his golden throne surrounded by smoke and wind. The fury in his eyes was divine and monstrous. Every wave of his army fell only to be replaced by another. Yet still, the circle held. Then, in the heart of the storm, Leonidas fell, pierced by arrows and spears, swallowed by the press of bodies. For a moment the line broke, but the Spartans surged forward in madness and grief. 3 times they charged into the mass of Persians to reclaim his body, dragging it back step by step, covered in blood. When the king's corpse was finally taken, Xerxes' rage consumed him. In a rare act of Persian blasphemy, he ordered the body mutilated, to make an example of the man who had humiliated his godhood. But even desecration could not erase what Leonidas had created. The last Greeks fought until the sky itself turned black with arrows. The hiss of iron drowned the last of their cries, and when silence finally fell, Thermopylae was gone, but Greece was not. Their deaths bought time. Time for Athens to raise its fleet, for Themistocles to lure the Persians into the straits of Salamis, where the empire would shatter upon the waves. On the stone at Thermopylae, the epitaph was carved, "Stranger, tell Sparta that we lie here." Obedient to her laws, the Persians took the pass, but not the story. History itself knelt before the courage of those who stood at the hot gates.